What are you even doing here? You were uninvited yesterday. The words sliced through the reception like broken glass, catching in throats and pricking pride as heads turned in a perfect, terrible unison. Forks paused mid-air. Champagne fizzed in flutes no one remembered to drink. I smiled, the kind of sweet, practiced smile Southern women are born knowing, and looked straight at my son's bride, the woman I had spent $43,000 trying to make happy. I'm leaving, I said, so gently a few people sighed in relief. But first, meet my special guest, an old friend of yours. When Jessica saw who stood behind me, the color drained from her face faster than the low country tide, and she dropped to the Italian marble like her dress had turned to lead. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. You'll want to stay with me. You're probably wondering how a 67-year-old grandmother ended up orchestrating the most spectacular wedding crash in Charleston's recent memory. Pull up a chair. I'll tell you. It started 6 months ago, with a knock on my door and the prettiest liar I've ever met. My name is Margaret Thompson, though everyone calls me Maggie. Until last week, I believed I was planning the wedding of the century for my only child, Andrew. I'd emptied what remained of my late husband's life insurance, cashed bonds I swore I'd leave to my grandchildren, even borrowed against my house, the little white one off King Street with the double piazzas that catch the river breeze, to give Andrew and Jessica the fairy tale she claimed to have dreamed of since kindergarten. The venue was the prestigious Bellamy Estate, all sweeping lawns, live oaks dripping Spanish moss, and a chapel whose pews have felt more whispered secrets than a church should. The dress was a $12,000 Vera Wang that needed 3 alterations and a small army to carry its train. The flowers? 2,000 white roses flown in from Ecuador because the local hothouse blooms didn't have the right soul. According to the stylist Jessica followed religiously on Instagram. I wrote the checks and smiled through the meetings. Because Jessica's family, she tearfully explained, had disowned her for marrying beneath their social class. In a city that still reads the society page like scripture. That kind of wound bleeds openly. I even clasped my grandmother's pearls, the ones worn by 4 generations of Thompson women, around her neck. Oh, Mrs. Thompson, she whispered, eyes shining like a Hollywood close-up. You're the mother I never had. It was a performance worthy of a standing ovation. Andrew was besotted, and I could see why. Jessica glowed in that effortless way some women do. All golden hair and wide doe eyes that could make a man forget his own name and social security number. She said she was a pediatric nurse, volunteered at the animal shelter on Saturdays, and talked about babies with a tenderness that made my chest ache in the best possible way. Andrew hasn't been this light since his father died 3 years ago. Seeing him laugh again felt like finding a warm patch of sun after months of shade. I wanted to love the girl he loved. I tried. But something about her stories never quite stuck. Little things. A sports team she claimed to follow. But she mixed up the division. A childhood spent all over. Yet she couldn't keep the states straight when I asked about her 3rd grade teacher. She paid cash everywhere. Said she was old-fashioned about credit. Which is a cute quirk until it isn't. And there was the way she nudged Andrew away from old friends with throwaway lines like, "They don't understand our kind of relationship. Babe, nothing you could pin to a corkboard with string and arrows, just a low, persistent hum of wrong." Still, a mother learns when to swallow her doubts. Andrew was 32 and happier than I'd seen him since the funeral folded into casseroles and sympathy cards. I told myself love is messy. That the heart takes detours normal people wouldn't. That maybe I was jealous of the time he gave someone who wasn't me. I busied my hands, finalizing the seating chart. Taste-testing crab cakes, arguing about the exact shade of white for the linens. There are more whites than there are sins. I've learned, if I kept moving, maybe the whisper inside my chest would tire itself out. It didn't. It sharpened. The truth arrived by accident. The way real truth often does, sideways. Without an invitation, daring you to pretend you didn't hear it. I was dropping off wedding favors, little tins of pralines with a custom monogram, at Andrew's apartment. He'd given me a key years ago and never asked for it back. That's trust you don't betray lightly. I knocked once out of habit. Got no answer. and let myself in to set the boxes on the kitchen counter. The hardwood hallway complains when you walk it, old bones. Like mine, so I was halfway down it when I heard her voice from the bedroom. Low and sharp into a hiss I hadn't heard before. "Marcus, I told you not to call me on this number." I froze like a burglar in my own life. The apartment was dim. Afternoon sun knifing through blinds and sketching bars across the hall. My heart was loud enough I was certain she'd hear it. "No, the wedding is still on schedule." "Yes, I'll have access to his accounts after we're married." A pause. A brittle little laugh. "What do you mean you want a bigger cut? We agreed on 30%. Every taught instinct I own. Schoolteacher, daughter of a mill worker. Widow of a decent man. Mother of a good son. Told me to march in there and end it. Instead, I pressed into the cool wall and let the centuries-old floors do me a favor. Their creaks covered my breathing in the tiny, horrified sounds trying to escape my throat. Look. The old lady has already given us over 40 grand. And she'll probably gift us more for the down payment after the wedding. This Mark is worth at least 200,000. Maybe more. No, he doesn't suspect. He's completely hooked. Mark. My son wasn't a fiancé in her mouth. He was a mark. The word sat there like a bug in milk. Bobbing. Refusing to sink even when I begged it to. I crept backward. Slow as a prayer. Palms slick. Fingers numb. A favor box slid inside the top carton with a paper whisper and I nearly screamed. Somehow. I made it to the door. Closed it without a click. And didn't remember breathing until I was 3 blocks away. Pulled over beneath a live oak that had watched better people than me break down and fix themselves back up again. I hyperventilated until I scared myself into stopping. Then I cried the way you do when the world you built gets its first crack, not polite tears. But hard. Embarrassing ones that leave your face blotchy and your chest tender. In that messy hour, every stray thread tied itself into a rope I could finally see. The cash payments. The Swiss cheese history. The isolation tactics delivered like helpful advice. The way she'd convinced Andrew to add her to his checking account, for convenience. And how she'd floated the idea of a bigger life insurance policy because it's what responsible couples do. She wasn't a woman in love, she was a professional. I had been funding my son's own robbery. When the shaking eased, something inside me shifted. The same steel I found when I sat beside my husband's hospital bed and told the doctors they would treat him like a person and not a chart. I wanted to drive straight to Andrew and pour the whole sordid mess onto his kitchen table. But I know my boy. Stubborn as his father and twice as loyal. If I came at him with accusation and no evidence, he'd choose the pretty story over the ugly truth. And I would become the villain she needed me to be. Love teaches you patience. Motherhood teaches you strategy. I wiped my face, fixed my lipstick in the rearview, and drove home very carefully. Because the world looks different after you learn what it really is. On my kitchen counter, under a magnet shaped like a palmetto tree, sat the week's to-do list. Confirm the string quartet. Finalize boutonnieres. Deliver final payment to the Bellamy coordinator. I stared at the neat handwriting and the tidy boxes begging to be checked and understood. With a clarity that landed like a blessing. That none of it mattered until I had something no performance could talk its way around. Proof. Real. Undeniable proof. I made tea I didn't drink and stood by the window long enough to watch the blue turn to indigo over the Ravenel Bridge. Then I sat down at my laptop and placed my fingers on the keys. If Sarah Collins, Jessica Miller to the rest of Charleston, thought she could gut my family and waltz out wearing my grandmother's pearls, she had picked the wrong mother. I did not yet know exactly how I would unmake her story. But I knew this. I would. And when I did, everyone would hear the truth sung clear enough to carry across the marsh. The morning after that phone call, I woke with a taste of iron in my mouth and a knot in my stomach that coffee couldn't untangle. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Like it knew something sacred had been broken inside its walls. My husband's photograph sat on the mantel. That familiar half-smile of his daring me to rise above panic. "All right, Jack," I whispered to him. "You fought cancer like a soldier. Time for me to fight a liar like a general. I am not, by any stretch, a woman who lives in the shadows. I pay my bills on time. I still bake pound cake for the church bazaar. And my wildest Saturday night is a glass of Chardonnay while watching reruns of Murder, She Wrote. But when the enemy is hiding behind lace veils and $1,000 smiles, you have to play a little dirty. That's how I found myself typing words I never thought would leave my fingertips. Private investigators near Charleston, South Carolina. The search results glittered like a lineup of quiet heroes. I skimmed past ads with cheesy magnifying glass logos and picked one that sounded sturdy. Patricia Hayes. Investigations, fraud, identity theft, missing persons. She'd once been a detective. Her bio bragged. Now working independently with 15 years of police experience. My heart, already galloping, picked up a gear. Within an hour, I was sitting in a corner booth of a cafe off Meeting Street, clutching a manila envelope of receipts, photographs, and every shred of detail I'd collected on Jessica Miller, the bride who was not what she claimed. Patricia walked in 10 minutes late, not apologizing, which I weirdly respected. She was in her 50s. Hair cropped short, shoulders squared like someone who had been yelled at by both rookies and criminals and had never flinched at either. She slid into the booth across from me, ordered black coffee without glancing at the menu, then turned her attention fully to me. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, voice level as granite, "tell me everything." So I did. From the Ecuadorian roses to the overheard conversation. I poured it all onto the Formica table, my voice shaking at first, then hardening as each damning detail tumbled out. Patricia listened without interruption, jotting notes in a neat blocky script. When I finally stopped, throat raw, she leaned back. "What you're describing," she said slowly, "is a classic romance scam. Marriage edition. They exist all over the country. Professionals. They study their targets, learn what you want to hear, and then become exactly that." The cafe's air conditioning hummed like static. My hands, still trembling, slid an envelope across the table. 5 crisp checks totaling $3,000. How long will it take for someone dumb enough to use her real voice on the phone? Patricia gave a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. Not long at all. 2 weeks later, Patricia called. I was in the kitchen steeping tea when the phone rang. And by the second sentence, I had to grip the counter to stay upright. "Margaret, you're going to want to sit down. Jessica Miller doesn't exist. The woman your son is marrying is actually named Sarah Collins. 29, Tampa-born, multiple arrests for fraud, convicted once. Works with partners, usually men who help research targets. And your Marcus?" That was Marcus Rivera, her most frequent accomplice and her ex-lover. The kettle screamed, and for a wild second I thought it was me. How do you know?" "Facial recognition," Patricia said crisply. "She's been running the Jessica Miller identity for about 8 months. Fake social security number, fake nursing credentials. The volunteer work at the free clinic is a cover, just enough realness to pass a background sniff. She's good, but not perfect. None of them are." My tea was bitter when I finally remembered to sip it. "So Andrew is marrying a ghost." "Worse," Patricia corrected. "He's marrying a predator." The word hit like a physical blow. I sat, clutching the phone, staring at my late husband's chair. Andrew, my boy, was already halfway through the spider's web and didn't even know he was sticky. "Patricia," I said finally, "find Marcus Rivera." There was silence, the kind professionals use when they're assessing whether their client is crazy. "Margaret, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking a man who has been hunting Sarah Collins for 2 years might want an invitation to her wedding." Her pause held a flicker of admiration. "You want him to crash it?" "I want him to end it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Within an hour, she texted me Marcus's file. Living in Atlanta. Working construction. 35 years old. Abandoned by Sarah after she swindled $15,000 and vanished. A man humiliated, wounded, burning with a need for payback. Exactly the kind of fire I needed to light at the altar. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan slicing the dark into ribbons. The phone heavy on the nightstand beside me. I could hear Jessica's syrupy voice in my memory, whispering about being the daughter I never had. I could also hear the venom underneath. The old lady already gave us 40 grand. Rage is a better caffeine than coffee. At 2 a.m., I sat up, picked up the phone, and dialed the number Patricia had given me. Marcus Rivera speaking. His voice was cautious, wary, with a trace of exhaustion. Mr. Rivera, my name is Margaret Thompson. You don't know me, but you know my son's fiancée. Though you knew her as Sarah Collins. Silence. So long I thought the call had dropped. Then, sharp as a blade. Where is she? She's about to marry my son in Charleston. 9 days from now. She's already stolen over $40,000 from me. And she's planning to take much more once she has legal access. Another silence. This one humming with anger. Lady, I don't know what kind of game. She told you the mark was worth at least $200,000. Ring any bells? His breath sucked in through the line. You heard her? I did. Every word. And I think you and I want the same thing. What's that? Justice. I said simply. Justice served in front of 300 guests and an officiant who thinks he's about to pronounce them husband and wife. When Marcus finally spoke again, there was something new in his voice, something cold and determined. Tell me what you're planning. And so I did. Marcus listened in silence as I laid out the bones of my idea. Only interrupting once to ask me to repeat the wedding date. His voice carried the grit of a man who'd been hardened by betrayal. The sort of edge you only earn when you've lost everything to someone who smiled while robbing you blind. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. So you want me to just walk into a church full of strangers? Point a finger at the bride? And spill her history? Not just spill it, I corrected, steadying my tone. Expose it. Rip the curtain off before she ruins another life. My son's life. Marcus gave a dry, humorless chuckle. Lady, I've been waiting 2 years for that chance. She left me in Memphis with a rental car bill, a hotel tab, and a ring I couldn't get refunded. $15,000 and every shred of dignity I had. You better believe I'll stand in that chapel. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. But relief curdled quickly into anxiety. This wasn't just about a man's revenge. This was about a mother saving her child. Then we need to plan it right. I don't want Andrew thinking this is some setup or some grudge you invented. He has to see the truth for himself. Clear as day. Marcus's voice dropped. Colder now. Don't worry. I kept everything. Photos, messages, recordings. I was stupid enough to fall for her. But I wasn't stupid enough to delete evidence. She always thought she was too clever for paper trails. But I've got enough dirt to bury her twice. Hearing those words was like breathing after weeks underwater. Then you'll come? I'll come, he said firmly. But I'm not doing this for you, Mrs. Thompson. I'm doing it for me. For every dime she stole and every night I spent cursing her name. I swallowed hard, gripping the phone tighter. That's fine. Just remember, while you're there for revenge, I'm there for my son. He has to walk away from this knowing who she really is. Not just believing his mother meddled him out of happiness. Understood, he said, then added with something close to admiration. You're tougher than you sound. The call ended, but its echoes filled my quiet house. I stood for a long time staring out the window at Charleston's sleepy streets. Wondering if I'd just invited chaos into my son's life, or saved him from it. Maybe both. The next few days blurred into a strange theater of pretending. Jessica floated through fittings and rehearsals with all the polish of a Southern belle in a glossy magazine spread. Never suspecting I knew her real name. Andrew, caught up in tuxedo alterations and work deadlines, called me less and less. When he did, his voice was laced with tension. Mom, I really wish you'd try harder with Jessica. She feels like you don't approve. Approve? If only he knew. Each call was a little knife, twisting deeper, reminding me that in his eyes, I was the obstacle, not the woman scheming to gut him financially. I learned to lie as smoothly as Sarah did, telling him I was fine, that I'd back off, for his sake. Every word tasted like ash. But sometimes love means swallowing fire if it keeps your child from burning. At night, I went over the plan until it hummed in my bones. Marcus would arrive the morning of the wedding. He'd wait in his truck near the estate until I texted him. My job was to be invisible until the right moment. To let Sarah dig her own grave and then give Marcus the stage to bury her. It was ruthless. It was theatrical. And it was the only way Andrew would ever believe. I found myself remembering a different Charleston wedding. 40 years earlier, when I'd walked down the aisle in a borrowed veil and my mother's dress. Jack had been waiting at the altar, nervous and smiling, and I'd thought my knees would give out from joy. That memory stung now. Weddings are supposed to be about beginnings. About promises whispered into forever. What we were heading toward was an ending, a performance where truth would be the only vow spoken aloud. Still, part of me grieved. I grieved the version of Jessica I'd believed in at first, the nurse who loved children. The woman who spoke of longing for family. The girl who made my son laugh again. That woman had never existed. But my heart had wanted her to. It hurt to realize I was mourning someone made of smoke. One evening, while Jessica posed for bridal portraits in the gardens, I caught Andrew on the porch of the estate, fiddling with his cufflinks. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for everything you've done. I know this hasn't been easy. Jessica thinks you don't like her. But I just want you to know it means a lot to me that you've tried." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Tried. He thought I was trying to like her. If he only knew I was trying to save him. I reached out, straightened his collar like I'd done since he was 10. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "I'd do anything for you. Anything." He smiled. A little boy's smile in a man's face. "I know, Mom." Then he kissed my cheek and walked back inside, leaving me fighting tears in the humid Charleston dusk. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, spread out the wedding itinerary like a battle plan, and wrote notes in the margins. 1:30. Text Marcus. 2 o'clock, ceremony begins. 2:15, truth arrives. The words steadied me. This wasn't sabotage. This was salvation disguised as scandal. As I put down my pen, I realized something. Jessica thought she had written the script of this wedding. But she hadn't factored in me. She hadn't realized that while she was busy rehearsing her lies, I was busy rehearsing justice. And come Saturday, the curtain was going to rise. The days leading up to the wedding moved with the cruel slowness of a storm you can see on the horizon but cannot outrun. Each sunrise brought fresh rehearsals, vendor calls, and more of Jessica's radiant smiles plastered across social media. To the world, she was the perfect Southern bride, glowing in engagement photos, her golden curls lit by Charleston sunsets, while hashtags like #Jessica and Andrew forever gathered likes by the hundreds. To me, she was a predator in silk, tightening her trap one Instagram story at a time. I had work to do. And it wasn't the kind you put in a bridal planner. On Tuesday morning, I pulled out my Rolodex of vendors, florist, caterer, photographer, estate coordinator, and began dialing. My voice softened into the syrupy tones Southern grandmothers perfect over decades. The kind that can deliver devastating news and still sound like a blessing. "Mrs. Sullivan," I cooed to the Bellamy estate coordinator. "This is Margaret Thompson, the groom's mother. I just wanted to let you know the Miller family has decided to cover the final balance after all." Isn't that just precious? Families reconciling right before a wedding. It's a dream come true. Mrs. Sullivan nearly squealed with delight. "That's wonderful news. Should I expect their payment directly?" "Yes, dear, and please, hold off on charging my account. The Millers are very particular about finances." I rattled off the burner phone number Patricia had traced to Sarah. The one she never answered but still kept active for appearances. "They'll be handling everything from here on." The coordinator thanked me profusely. I hung up and allowed myself a grim smile. One domino tipped. 3 more to go. The florist believed me without question, thrilled at the thought of a family reunion in time for 2,000 roses. The caterer, though suspicious at first, softened when I gushed about how relieved I was that Jessica's parents had come around. The photographer just sighed with relief, saying, "As long as someone pays before I click the shutter, I don't care if it's the Pope." By the end of the day, every vendor expected final payment from the mythical Miller family, a family Sarah had conjured out of thin air. One that would never return their calls. Come Saturday morning, the Bellamy estate would face a nightmare of unpaid invoices, frantic coordinators, and a bride scrambling to plug leaks she didn't even know existed. It was sabotage, yes, but sabotage with a purpose. Sarah's perfect day was going to collapse under the weight of her own lies. Meanwhile, Andrew's calls had grown shorter. Strained. On Wednesday evening, he rang me as I sat on the porch swing. Cicadas buzzing in the humid air. "Mom," he began, his voice tight. "Jessica's upset. She feels like you're pulling away. Not coming to the rehearsal dinner made her cry." I thought that was her wish. I answered evenly. It was. But, he hesitated, then sighed. "I just want peace. I don't want to be caught between the two most important women in my life." The words sliced me clean through. To Andrew, she and I were equals, mother and bride. Two pillars holding up his happiness. If only he knew she was termites gnawing at the foundation. I swallowed the ache in my throat and forced gentleness into my tone. "Andrew, sweetheart, I understand. This is Jessica's day. If my absence makes it easier for her, then I'll respect that. You deserve a perfect wedding." He went quiet, then murmured, "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." When the line went dead, I sat on the swing until the stars blurred through my tears. He thought I was the problem. He thought my doubts were jealousy, not protection. Sometimes love is letting your child believe you're the villain until you can prove otherwise. Thursday night brought a surprise. My phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Mrs. Thompson?" The voice was honey dipped in poison. "Jessica." I stiffened. "Yes? I just wanted to thank you for being so understanding about Saturday." She purred. "I know it might seem harsh, but a bride deserves to feel comfortable on her big day." I forced a smile she couldn't see. "Of course, dear. A wedding should be free of stress." Her tone softened into faux vulnerability. "Andrew said you're driving to Savannah for the weekend? Antiquing? Fishing for information. Classic." "That's right. A little getaway while you two begin your honeymoon. It'll be nice to give you space." She sighed in mock relief. "That's so gracious of you. Maybe, once Andrew and I are settled, we could have lunch? I'd really like for us to be friends." The audacity nearly made me laugh. Instead, I kept my tone smooth. "That sounds lovely, Jessica. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about." When I hung up, I poured myself a generous glass of Pinot Grigio and toasted my reflection in the dark window. "Here's to friends, Margaret," I whispered. "May they get exactly what they deserve." By Friday evening, the air in Charleston was heavy, promising rain. The city buzzed with anticipation. The papers had even mentioned the Thompson-Miller wedding as the society event of the season. Neighbors waved. Strangers congratulated me in the grocery store. And all I could do was nod politely, carrying the terrible truth like a lead weight in my chest. I barely slept that night. Instead, I rehearsed the sequence again and again in my mind. Marcus in his car at 1:30. The ceremony beginning at 2 o'clock. My signal, the truth exploding like a thunderclap in the middle of the chapel. By dawn, I was exhausted but ready. Ready to tear the mask off Jessica Miller. Ready to save my son. Ready to be hated if it meant he lived free. Tomorrow, Charleston would witness the most unforgettable wedding it had ever seen. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly. The kind of weather wedding photographers label romantic, but brides call ruinous. I woke at 5 a.m., long before the first church bells. Jittery as if I were the one about to walk down the aisle. My black dress hung ready on the door, plain but dignified, and beside it lay my grandmother's pearls, the same ones Jessica had paraded around her neck as if she'd earned them. Today, they would not adorn a con artist. Today, they would remind me of who I was and what I stood for. By 9 a.m., Marcus called. I could hear the rumble of traffic behind him. The faint hiss of windshield wipers. "I'm 20 minutes out of Charleston. You sure you're ready for this, Mrs. Thompson?" I stood before the mirror in my hallway, tightening the clasp of those pearls, feeling the weight of generations settle against my skin. I've never been more ready for anything. There was a pause. Then his voice softened. "What if your son doesn't forgive you?" I took a deep breath. That question had haunted me all week. Then at least I'll know I saved him from a woman who would have destroyed him. Sometimes love means being the villain in someone else's story until they're ready to see the truth. Marcus let out a low whistle. "Damn, you're tougher than you sound." I almost smiled. Mr. Rivera, I raised a son, buried a husband, and survived 67 southern summers. I'm tougher than I look. 2. The Bellamy estate was already alive with chaos by noon. Vendors were calling non-stop, demanding payment from the mysterious Miller family. I let every call go to voicemail, my phone buzzing like a wasp trapped in a jar. At 12:30, Andrew rang. Mom, something weird's happening. The florist, the caterer, the venue, everyone's calling Jessica about balances. She swears she never told them her family was paying. Do you know anything about this? I pressed just enough confusion into my tone to sound believable. Oh my goodness, that does sound strange. What did Jessica say? She's upset. She thinks someone's sabotaging the wedding. His voice dropped. Mom, you didn't, did you? The words pierced me, but I forced out a gasp of wounded pride. Andrew Thompson, are you suggesting your mother would sabotage your wedding? After everything I've done to make this day perfect? Silence. Then a guilty sigh. No, of course not. I'm sorry. Jessica's just stressed. You know, she's looking for someone to blame. That's understandable. I soothed. The important thing is you're marrying the woman you love today. Don't let a little mix-up spoil it. If only he knew how prophetic that last line truly was. At 1 p.m., I slipped into my car, parked 2 blocks from the estate, and approached on foot. The rain had slowed to a mist, the Spanish moss hanging heavy like damp lace. Guests in their finery streamed through the grand gates, men in tuxedos, women in hats wider than dinner plates. I entered through the garden side, past the catering kitchen, unnoticed among staff and deliveries. By 1:45, I was positioned behind a marble column at the rear of the chapel, my pulse thrumming in my ears. I could see everything, the white roses lining the aisle, the guests fanning themselves with programs, the minister adjusting his notes nervously. Most of all, I saw Andrew, my sweet boy, standing tall at the altar in his tuxedo, his face glowing with joy I knew would soon shatter. My throat tightened. The wedding march began at 2:15. The heavy chapel doors creaked open, and Sarah, entered. She was radiant. I'll give her that. The $12 gown shimmered in the candlelight, and my grandmother's pearls glistened against her pale skin. Every eye turned to her. Every phone lifted to capture what they thought was a love story. I pulled out my cell phone and typed a single word to Marcus, waiting in his car just outside. Now, asterisk. My thumb hovered for half a heartbeat before I hit send. The text whooshed away, and in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. The chapel was hushed, save for the steady chords of the organ swelling as Jessica, Sarah, glided down the aisle on her father of the bride's borrowed arm. Guests leaned into one another, sighing at the spectacle, phones raised like worshippers at some modern altar. To them, this was a fairy tale, the culmination of months of planning and whispered anticipation. To me, it was the final act of a play written in lies. And I was about to cue the curtain drop. The doors at the back of the chapel slammed open. Every head turned. There he was, Marcus Rivera. Not polished, not groomed like the other guests, but carrying himself with a raw confidence that silenced the organ mid-note. His suit was rumpled, his shoes still damp from the drizzle, but he strode down the aisle like a man on a mission, eyes fixed on the bride. For a moment, the crowd thought perhaps he was late, or worse, an uninvited drunk. But then he spoke. Sarah Collins. His voice thundered, echoing against marble and wood. Did you really think you could hide forever? The bouquet slipped from Jessica's hands, white roses scattering across the aisle like bones. A gasp rippled through the congregation, a sound so collective it felt rehearsed. Andrew stepped forward instinctively, placing himself between his bride and the stranger. Excuse me, he said firmly, confusion in his voice. You've got the wrong person. This is Jessica Miller. Marcus laughed, a short, bitter bark that carried no humor. Jessica Miller? That's what she's calling herself now. He pulled a battered manila folder from inside his jacket and held it high. Her real name is Sarah Collins. Professional con artist. I should know. I was her partner before she stole $15,000 from me and vanished into the night. Gasps became murmurs, murmurs became whispers, and the whispers rose into a storm of disbelief. Guests craned their necks. Phones lifted higher. A few already live streaming. Jessica's mask faltered, her voice pitching higher as she clutched Andrew's arm. Andrew, I don't know this man. He's clearly unstable. Please. You have to believe me. I could see the tremor in her hands. The gloss of sweat at her temple. For the first time since she'd sashayed into our lives. She was rattled. But Marcus wasn't finished. He snapped open the folder and fanned out photographs. Here's Sarah in Miami, running a credit card scam at the Ritz-Carlton. Here she is in Birmingham, faking cancer to fleece a church collection. And here, he jabbed a finger at the image. Voice cold, is my favorite. Sarah leaving our hotel in Memphis with my wallet, my watch, and the engagement ring I was stupid enough to buy her. The congregation buzzed louder, shock and disbelief twisting into suspicion. A few guests stood, murmuring into their phones. I spotted Andrew's college roommate. His face pale as he live-streamed the chaos to God knows how many viewers. Andrew turned to Jessica, his voice taut. Jessica, what is he talking about? Her wide eyes darted from Marcus to me, then back to Andrew. He's lying. I swear he's lying. You know me. Andrew, you know I love you. Love? Marcus scoffed. He pulled out his phone, scrolling until he found the file he wanted. You want to know what she really thinks of you? He hit play. Sarah's voice filled the chapel, crisp despite the faint static. The old bat is so desperate for grandchildren she'll believe anything. And the son, complete mama's boy. All I have to do is cry about my tragic past. And he writes another check. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica, Sarah, stood frozen, her face stripped bare of sweetness. Andrew's color drained. He stumbled back a step, staring at her as though she'd grown horns. You called my mother an old bat? No, Andrew. It was taken out of context. Her voice cracked, brittle and desperate. Please, don't listen to him. He's twisting everything. But the murmurs in the pews told a different story. Doubt had been seeded, and it was blossoming quickly. Behind my marble column, I pressed a trembling hand to my lips. My son's world was unraveling before his eyes. And though it shattered me to watch, it was the only way he'd ever see the truth. And we were only at the beginning. The chapel pulsed with tension, like a kettle seconds from whistling. Sarah's face twitched between outrage and desperation, her porcelain composure cracking in jagged seams. She reached for Andrew's hands, clutching them like a lifeline. Andrew, listen to me. This man, he's obsessed. I turned him down once. And now he's making up lies to destroy us. Don't let him ruin our day. Don't let him ruin us. Andrew stood rigid, his fingers slack in hers. His eyes, once filled with adoration, now clouded with something heavier, doubt. He turned to Marcus. If this is true, prove it. Marcus smirked grimly, scrolling again on his phone. Gladly, he lifted it high, and the recording played. Look, the old lady already gave us 40 grand. And she'll probably fork over more for the house down payment. This mark is worth at least 200,000. Maybe more. He doesn't suspect a thing. He's hooked. Sarah's voice, cold and businesslike, rang through the sacred air. The words seemed to echo even after the file ended, lingering like smoke after a fire. A collective gasp rose from the pews. One elderly guest clutched her pearls. Another muttered a prayer under his breath. Even the minister's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of the altar. Andrew staggered back as though struck, eyes wide and glassy. You called me a mark. His voice was hollow. No, Sarah cried, panic sharpening her tone. That wasn't me, Andrew. It was edited, it's fake. But her protests faltered under the weight of her own unraveling act. Her doe-eyed sweetness curdled into something sharper, meaner. The edges of her smile hardened. Her words too quick, too defensive. I watched from behind my column as the mask I'd despised for months finally slipped. The sweetness that had fooled everyone, the nurses at the clinic, the neighbors, even me, was gone. What stood in its place was a calculating woman cornered, teeth bared. Andrew's voice rose, louder now, anger overtaking disbelief. You looked me in the eye and told me you loved me. You wore my grandmother's pearls while you mocked my mother. Was any of it real? Sarah's hands shook violently, but her eyes darted toward me, finding my face in the shadows. Recognition sparked, then hatred. Her arm shot out, finger pointing straight at me. You, she spat, her voice venomous. This was you. You orchestrated this. Heads swiveled toward me in unison. Whispers rippled like wind through tall grass. For the first time, I was exposed. No longer the unseen hand pulling strings but a player standing center stage. Andrew's eyes widened. Mom? What are you doing here? You said you were in Savannah. My legs wobbled, but I stepped forward, spine straight, pearls steady at my throat. I lied. Sweetheart, I said calmly, meeting his gaze, something I learned from watching the experts. The crowd rustled, electricity crackling as the truth hung naked in the air. Andrew's voice cracked between horror and awe. You orchestrated this? I exposed it. I corrected, lifting my chin. There's a difference. Sarah's voice rose, shrill with fury. She's jealous. Andrew, jealous that you love me more than her. She hired this man, fed him lies, and now she's trying to tear us apart because she can't stand not being the center of your life. It was a clever move. One final desperate gambit. Play the mother-in-law card. The stereotype everyone half believed anyway. And for a heartbeat, I saw the flicker of doubt creep back into my son's eyes. The chapel held its breath. Marcus stepped forward, his face grim. Mrs. Thompson didn't hire me. I volunteered. You want proof? He raised his phone again. Thumb poised. Here's the recording from 3 weeks ago. Your voice bragging about how easy it was to manipulate a lonely old woman and her devoted son. The file played, crystal clear. The old bat is so desperate for grandchildren. She'll believe anything. And the son, mama's boy through and through. I just cry about my tragic past. And he hands over another check. Easy money. This time, the silence that followed wasn't disbelief. It was conviction. A truth so undeniable it flattened every argument. Every excuse. Guests shook their heads. Some disgusted. Others pitying. A few lifting their phones higher to capture the downfall in real time. Andrew's face drained of color. His voice was quiet, but each word landed like a stone. You called my mother a lonely old bat. Sarah stumbled, tears streaking her mascara, but no one moved to comfort her. The tide had turned, and for the first time in months, I felt the scales balance. Sarah's carefully constructed facade collapsed like wet paper under a storm. Her shoulders sagged. The practiced posture of the glowing bride gone, replaced by the twitchy panic of a cornered thief. Mascara streaked her cheeks, black rivers cutting through the powder she'd worn like armor. Andrew, she pleaded, her voice wobbling between sobs and shrieks. You have to believe me. He's twisting everything. I love you. I do. Love? Andrew's voice was ice, each syllable flung like a stone. You lied about your name, your job, your family. Everything. You called me a mark. You mocked my mother, the woman who gave you everything. What part of this was love? Jessica? Or should I say, Sarah? The use of her real name rang through the chapel like a final judgment. Guests murmured louder, shifting uncomfortably in their pews. A few had risen outright. Their phones tilted as they recorded. I spotted one woman whispering into her husband's ear. No doubt already uploading the footage to Facebook with a caption about the wedding scandal of the decade. Sarah's hands trembled violently, clutching at the pearls around her neck, the same pearls I had once clasped there. Imagining her as a daughter. Now, they looked like stolen spoils. Andrew, please. People can change. I was that person, yes. But I'm different now. Haven't I shown you kindness? Haven't I? Kindness bought with my mother's life savings. His voice cracked, but his face hardened. That's not kindness. That's theft with a smile. The congregation hummed with agreement. The spell she'd cast on everyone, the wide eyes, the soft voice, the tragic backstory, was unraveling under the weight of undeniable evidence. But before Andrew could say more, a sharp voice cut through the air. Sarah Collins? Every head turned toward the rear of the chapel. 2 men in dark suits strode in with the purposeful gait of people who never doubted their authority. The taller one held up a badge. FBI. You're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and violation of federal banking regulations. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah's face went ashen. No, this isn't happening. You can't, this is harassment. I haven't done anything wrong. She jerked away as the agents approached, clutching her skirts like she could outrun federal law in a $12 gown. Marcus crossed his arms, his smirk sharp. Told you it wasn't over. Sweetheart, I sent them everything, your fake social security, your employment history, the recordings. You really should have chosen better partners. The taller agent read her Miranda rights as he clipped cold steel around her wrists. The clink of handcuffs against lace and silk echoed louder than any hymn. Guests craned their necks, some standing on tiptoe, some whispering prayers of thanks, others muttering about scandal. Sarah twisted back toward Andrew, her voice a ragged wail. Andrew, please, tell them this is a mistake. Tell them you believe me. Don't let them take me away. Andrew's jaw clenched. His face was pale, but his eyes were resolute. You need to go, Sarah. Her expression hardened into venom. You think you've won, don't you? She swung her gaze to me, eyes blazing with hatred. Congratulations, Mrs. Thompson. You got your son back. But you've ruined him. He'll never trust another woman again. And when he dies alone, it'll be your fault. The words were acid, and for a fleeting moment they pierced. But Andrew didn't flinch. No, he said, voice steady. She didn't ruin me. You did. My mother was trying to protect me. You were trying to destroy me. That's the difference. The agents pulled Sarah toward the doors as she shrieked threats. About lawyers. About revenge. About connections that would make us regret this day. But her voice was swallowed by the swell of murmurs and the relentless click of cameras. With every step she took, her power diminished, until finally she was just a woman in handcuffs. A con artist dragged out of her own fairy tale in front of 300 horrified witnesses. When the doors closed behind her, the chapel fell into a stunned, echoing silence. The minister stood frozen at the altar, his open Bible trembling in his hands. Guests stared at one another, unsure whether to leave, to clap, or to pray. And in the middle of it all, Andrew stood alone at the altar, still in his tuxedo, staring at the doors where his bride had been escorted out. He looked shattered, hollow, and achingly young. My heart broke for him. But beneath the ache was something sharper, steadier, the certainty that I had saved him. The silence in the chapel lingered like smoke after a fire. 300 guests sat frozen, unsure whether to bolt for the exits or stay for whatever came next. The minister looked as if he'd stumbled into a nightmare no seminary class had ever prepared him for, Bible still open. Words of blessing stalled in his throat. A few guests whispered nervously, but most just stared at Andrew, who stood rooted at the altar, tuxedo crisp, eyes fixed on the door where Sarah had been dragged away in handcuffs. My instinct screamed at me to run to him, to gather him in my arms like I had when he was a boy scraping his knees. But I stayed still. This was his moment to process, to feel the full sting of betrayal. To rush in now would be to shield him from a pain he needed to confront. And I knew too well that wounds denied only rot deeper. Finally, Andrew turned. His eyes swept the room, first the guests, then the empty aisle strewn with crushed white roses. And at last they found me. Our gazes locked. The mix of emotions in his face made my chest ache. Gratitude, humiliation, bewilderment, and a flicker of something that looked very much like respect. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying in the hush. Well, he said dryly. This is awkward. A ripple of nervous laughter broke through the tension. People shifted, relieved to have something, anything, to release the pressure. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, a boyish gesture that made him look suddenly vulnerable. I want to thank you all for coming. I know this isn't how you plan to spend your Saturday afternoon. The wedding is, obviously cancelled. Another uneasy chuckle moved through the pews. He paused, then added, but the reception is already paid for. So, if anyone wants dinner and an open bar, you're welcome to it. God knows I could use a drink. This time, laughter rolled louder, honest and cathartic. Guests began standing, stretching stiff legs, murmuring to one another. The spell of shock had broken, replaced with the surreal acceptance that this was now a story they'd be telling for decades. Phones buzzed in every hand, texts, photos, live streams spreading the scandal across Charleston faster than any newspaper ever could. Andrew descended the altar steps and moved toward me. The crowd parted instinctively, like the Red Sea making way for Moses. When he reached me, he stopped, studying my face for a long, heavy beat. "Mom," he said softly, "we need to talk." My throat tightened. "Yes, sweetheart, we do." His eyes flicked to the pearls at my neck, then back to mine. With slow, careful hands, he unclasped the necklace from around Sarah's throat. No, not Sarah's anymore, but my family's again. He pressed it into my hands. "These belong to you." The familiar weight filled my palms. Trembling slightly, I closed my fingers over them. "Actually, they belong to the woman my son eventually marries. When he finds someone worthy of them." Andrew's eyes welled, and for a moment he looked 10 years old again, standing in the driveway clutching a scraped knee. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for not believing you, for choosing her over you, for being such an idiot." I cupped his cheek, smoothing my thumb against skin damp with tears. "You weren't an idiot, sweetheart. You were in love. Or at least you were in love with the person you thought she was. That doesn't make you foolish, it makes you human." He swallowed hard, his voice rough. "How long did you know?" "Long enough to hire a private investigator. 2 weeks ago, I had proof." My lips curved into a faint, tired smile. "And Marcus?" "He volunteered for revenge duty when I told him where to find her." "Hell hath no fury like a con artist scorned." Apparently. A shaky laugh escaped Andrew's throat. "You've been busy. I've been protecting my son." I slipped the pearls back into my purse. "Now, what do you say we face the music at your, well, not a reception?" He exhaled, straightening his shoulders. "People are going to have questions. Then we'll give them answers," I said, looping my arm through his. Together, we stepped into the flow of guests moving toward the ballroom. As we walked, I caught snippets of conversation, shock, gossip, sympathy, admiration. "Margaret Thompson, what a woman. Never trusted that girl. Too sweet to be true. Can you believe she pulled this off?" The words swirled around me. A strange cocktail of scandal and respect. The ballroom, stripped of its wedding pretense, felt looser, almost festive. The band abandoned classical marches for blues. The bar opened early, and laughter replaced whispers. People toasted to survival, to truth, to the bizarre fortune of witnessing history. Andrew moved through the crowd like a politician, shaking hands, thanking guests, apologizing for the chaos. His smile was tired but genuine, his composure steadier than I dared hope. Watching him, I felt a fierce swell of pride, not in his career or charm, but in his resilience. This was my son, bloodied but unbroken. And as I stood at the edge of the dance floor, pearls clutched in my fist, I realized something simple, something undeniable. Sometimes the best weddings are the ones that never happen. The so-called reception turned out to be more honest than any wedding feast could have been. Without the forced smiles, staged photos, and endless toasts to a union built on lies. People relaxed. The bar was crowded within minutes. The band shifted from rehearsed waltzes to playful jazz, and guests mingled with a freedom that felt almost rebellious. What had started as the scandal of the season was transforming into something else entirely, a gathering bound not by ceremony, but by truth shared in the open. I found myself at the dessert table, staring at the tiered wedding cake. Perfect white frosting, sugar roses curling in delicate spirals. Untouched. Tradition said the bride and groom should cut it together, smiling while photographers immortalized the first slice. Instead, here it stood, a monument to what almost was. My hand hovered over the knife before I pulled back. Not mine to cut, I thought. Not yet. "Mrs. Thompson." I turned. Marcus Rivera stood there, holding a glass of bourbon. His presence far less menacing now that the storm had passed. His suit was still wrinkled, but his shoulders looked lighter. He extended his free hand. "Thank you." I shook it firmly. "For what?" "For giving me the chance to face her. For letting me say what I'd been rehearsing for 2 years. His jaw tightened. Closure's a word people throw around. But today I actually felt it. I studied him for a long moment. A man like Marcus had every reason to be bitter, to disappear into the shadows of resentment. Instead, he'd chosen to stand in the light, exposing her lies even at the risk of humiliation. You didn't just help me, I said. You saved my son. He gave a small, almost shy smile. Most mothers would have just begged their kid to listen. You played chess while everyone else was still playing checkers. His words landed heavier than he knew. For weeks I had questioned myself, wondering if I'd gone too far. If I'd destroyed Andrew's faith in love just to keep him safe. But hearing Marcus, a man who'd lived in Sarah's labyrinth of lies, reminded me that this wasn't just about me. This was bigger. After he left, I stood alone for the first time that day. Exhaustion settling into my bones. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the echo of Sarah's hateful words in my head. He'll never trust another woman again. You've ruined him for love forever. I was still lost in that ache when Andrew appeared beside me, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. His tie was loosened, his hair mussed, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in months. You look like you're second-guessing yourself, he said gently, handing me a glass. I accepted it with a shaky smile, just wondering if there might have been a kinder way. He chuckled, a sound edged with tiredness but also sincerity. Like what? Sitting me down and telling me my fiancé was a con artist? I would have accused you of jealousy and gone right back to her. You know I would have. I sighed, admitting the truth. Yes, you would have. He took a sip of champagne, then leaned closer, voice dropping. You know what changed my mind? It wasn't Marcus's folder, or even the recordings. It was her face. The second she realized you'd outplayed her, the mask slipped. For the first time, I saw her, really saw her. Cold, calculating, and angry that someone had beaten her at her own game. That's when I knew. I swallowed hard, tears pricking. What did you see? Her respect, Andrew said simply. She respected you as an opponent. And if she respected you, that meant you weren't crazy. You were right all along. We stood in silence, clinking glasses gently. Around us, guests were laughing, eating, even dancing. What was supposed to be a celebration of a lie had become a strange sort of wake, a funeral for illusions. A birth for truth. Andrew stared into his glass, then admitted softly, part of me's relieved, not just because she's gone, but because something always felt off. Sometimes she looked at me like she was trying to remember who she was supposed to be. My heart ached for him. Why didn't you say anything? Because I thought it was wedding stress. And because he hesitated, searching for words. I was 32 years old and had never been in love before. I thought if I questioned it too hard, it would disappear. I reached for his hand, squeezing tight. Oh, sweetheart, that doesn't make you pathetic. That makes you human. And humans want love. There's nothing wrong with that. The only shame belongs to the people who exploit it. He squeezed back, his grip warm and strong. Thanks, Mom, for seeing through her, for protecting me, for doing it in a way I couldn't ignore. You're welcome, I whispered. But next time you fall in love, maybe introduce me earlier in the process. He laughed, genuine this time. Next time I fall in love, I'm running a full background check first. Maybe that's a little extreme, I teased, though part of me wasn't so sure. He raised his glass in a toast. Here's to justice, served ice cold with a side of public humiliation. I clinked mine against his, my chest finally unclenching. Here's to family, and knowing when to fight for the people you love. The champagne fizzed between us, bubbles rising as if to carry away the weight of the day. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to breathe. The ballroom hummed with a strange, liberated energy, freed from the illusion of a perfect wedding. People seemed lighter, less guarded. Guests who had arrived in stiff tuxedos and gowns now laughed freely. Shoes kicked off under tables. Ties loosened. The band played blues with a sultry edge. And a few brave couples even danced, spinning not to celebrate a marriage, but to shake off the shock of witnessing it implode. I sat with Andrew at a corner table, our champagne glasses nearly empty. The pearls lay coiled in my purse. their weight steady, grounding. Across the room, conversations buzzed, phrases drifting toward me. Did you see her face when the FBI walked in? Bless Margaret, she saved that boy's life. I always thought she was too perfect to be real. Word was already spreading beyond these walls. Guests posted clips online, and by midnight, Charleston's gossip mill would be roaring. Tomorrow, it would be on local news. By Monday, maybe even national outlets would catch on. The Charleston wedding scandal, they'd call it, the kind of headline that trends for weeks. I imagined hashtags flying across Twitter. Hashtag runaway bride, hashtag con artist bride, hashtag justice served. Part of me recoiled at the thought of our private tragedy becoming public spectacle. But another part of me, the part still burning with righteous fury, thought, good, let the world know, let no other family fall for her tricks. Andrew sipped his champagne, watching the guests with a tired but wry smile. You know, he said softly, people keep coming up to me saying how brave you are. How smart. How you saw through her when no one else did. I studied his profile, the strong jawline he'd inherited from his father. The same weary crease between his brows I'd seen on Jack during hard times. I wasn't brave, I said. I was desperate. Desperate people make good detectives. He turned to me, eyes glinting with something that felt like admiration. No, Mom, you were more than desperate. You were strategic. You played the long game. If you'd just told me, I never would have believed you. But you staged it so I couldn't deny the truth. That wasn't chance. That was genius. A blush crept into my cheeks. Maybe it was just a mother's instinct. Maybe. His smile softened. But I'll never underestimate you again. For the first time all day, I let myself laugh. It bubbled up. Surprising. Cleansing. Good. Took you 32 years to figure that out. Later, as the band slid into a slow, mournful tune, I found myself standing alone near the tall windows overlooking the estate gardens. The rain had stopped, leaving the world glistening, every leaf jeweled with water. Lanterns glowed along the walkways, their light spilling like liquid gold across the wet stone. I pressed a hand to the glass, feeling the cool night against my skin. Sometimes the hardest part of motherhood is knowing when to step back. When to let your child stumble. But sometimes, just sometimes, you have to step forward. Even if it means being hated. Tonight, I had been both villain and savior. I had torn my son's heart in half to save his future. And though it nearly broke me, I would do it again without hesitation. Behind me, Andrew joined me at the window. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood shoulder to shoulder, our reflections blending in the glass. Finally, he murmured, she said you ruined me for love. My chest tightened. I heard. She was wrong. He said simply, she didn't ruin me, and neither did you. You saved me. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them back. One day, Andrew, you'll meet a woman worthy of those pearls. Someone honest. Someone who doesn't need lies to be loved. His hand slid over mine. Strong. Steady. And when I do, you'll be the first to meet her. I turned, kissed his cheek, and smiled through the tears that refused to be held back any longer. That's all I ask. The band struck up something lively again. Laughter rose, and the ballroom came alive once more. The wedding that wasn't had turned into a celebration of resilience, of truth, of survival. And though tomorrow would bring headlines, judgment, and gossip, tonight was ours. As Andrew and I lifted our glasses one final time, I knew this. Sometimes the best weddings are the ones that never happen.